It's a great spot. I know Fort Collins pretty well, touring through Colorado. I've definitely played a couple of shows there, but Fort Collins was the place. That's the first place. It's northern Colorado, correct?
Yeah, we're about an hour, 15 minutes north of Denver.
Okay, and it's right near the border because that was the first place I remember when weed first became legal. We were on tour. And Fort Collins was like the first place you could hit that had a dispensary, if I remember correctly.
Probably. That's awesome.
Yeah. But you're not from there originally. Where are you from originally?
So I grew up in Minnesota, in a suburb of Minneapolis, Edina.
Okay.
I spent a few years in my childhood in New Jersey, and then my parents moved back to Minnesota.
What part of Jersey?
Chatham.
Chatham. Okay. Yeah, I'm from North Jersey, Bergen County.
Okay.
Sopranos country.
It's what country?
Sopranos country.
Oh, right. Yeah. And then I lived in Seattle. I moved to Seattle after I graduated college in '91.
Okay.
Or a couple years after I graduated college. I lived in Minneapolis after college for a few years, and then moved to Seattle, and just happened to be there when, just before Nirvana's Nevermind album came out and Pearl Jam's 10 album came out. And I just wound up in the middle of this huge music scene, which was a lot of fun. And that's kind of what got me into doing concert art and things like that. And then in the summer of, my wife and I decided to move to New York City.
Well, let me stop you there. Hold on. We got a couple of things I want to ask.
Yeah.
First, you said suburb of Minneapolis. That's already a huge music city within itself. Were you going to see any kind of shows? Were you close enough? Did you see any shows in Minneapolis growing up?
I did. I was kind of a late bloomer with music. My college roommate likes to give me a hard time. Anytime I try to argue about music with him, he says, "Yeah, you and your little fucking shoebox." Because I showed up with a shoebox full of cassettes, and that's all I really knew about music, and it was not a lot.
Were you doing art at that time, though?
Yeah, I was drawing, but it was really more kind of after college. I started going to concerts. I lived in Minneapolis and then Seattle, and I really delved into it. I worked at record stores, and I worked at a Ticketmaster outlet. So
shit. Wait, in Minneapolis?
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, for people who have I'm 34, but I can remember the last Ticketmaster outlets in the mall in New Jersey. There was like one, and obviously no longer there, but it's fun. Well, okay, now my brain's going wild. It's always been I've collected all of my concert ticket stubs throughout the decades. I have hundreds. And It's always, I want to make a kind of custom made glass coffee table with it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, because we'll get into it. You've worked with Fish and other bands like that. Fish being, a band that does ticket artwork. I mean, the art of the ticket is now going to be no longer almost.
Right, because it'll all be digital and things like that.
Everything. You can't get a physical ticket anymore. It's a bummer. Right. You were slinging those things, but from behind a desk.
Yeah. We had some adventures. It was kind of like one of those. Not non-glamorous minimum wage jobs. Yeah. And so we sort of felt we were entitled to the best tickets since we were selling these things. So I had front row center for the Rolling Stones.
So you were able to get the hookup through that job?
Well, we would punch them out on a machine, and we would just we'd just buy the tickets, the first ones that came out. I was in the front row center for Prince, and a number of other great shows, but it was kind of crazy.
That was you can't really see it, but that's a Prince poster. That was the last show he played at the Fillmore before he passed away. And wow. I waited, they announced it that day. I'm about a mile from the Fillmore. I took off work. I went straight there, and I waited like the old school days. You had to wait in the line for and I got one ticket.
Wow.
Yeah. He played 2 shows that night, and we're talking about Minneapolis, right? But he played 2 shows that night, back to back. First show started at midnight.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. So were you at the first one or the second one?
First one. It was like a Tuesday night, and they announced it it had to be like, this is 2014, 13. So I don't even know if Instagram was really a thing at that point. But yeah, I heard it, and I'm like, fuck it. And I did. And that's actually the first poster. That's number 1
Wow. Nice. That's a pretty
There's a
great.
story behind. That's a story behind that too, but whatever. But so wait, so you're the original ticket scalper?
Well, I wasn't scalping. I was just sort of getting them for myself. The manager actually got fired because he didn't realize like you could pump out the tickets from the machine, but you had to make the balance equal at the end of the day. And he didn't have the money, but so he just put them in the safe and thought he'd pay for them the next week or something. And then he got caught. And then eventually they took the Ticketmaster machine out of our store.
Wild. That's why. That's so funny. So then you end up in Seattle months before that place would kind of change everything. And then, so you're kind of coming, you're like, what, in your early 20s, mid 20s at that point, kind of just stuck there. You're there.
Yeah. I must have been, let's see, 24 when I moved to Seattle.
What part of Seattle?
I lived on Lower Queen Anne.
Mhm.
I lived in, my favorite place to live there was in Fremont. I lived in this place called the Fremont Artist Foundry. And it it was this industrial type space that this guy who was a sculptor built with like maybe a dozen live-in artist studios. And that was just fantastic. I mean, because all these people doing this cool stuff and just big space where you could just put paper on the wall and paint and draw. And that was great. That was in Fremont. I also lived on Beacon Hill. I lived on Capitol Hill. I moved around quite a bit, even though I was only there for 4 years.
Yeah, I was just in Seattle a couple of weeks ago. I love that. I love that city. So when you said you kind of, that's when you started doing this style of artwork too, is when you kind of got to Seattle. I mean, what were your influences back then? Because your artwork reminds you of some people, but I'm kind of curious to who are your influences then?
Well, when I moved to Seattle, I really moved there because the woman who was my girlfriend, who's now my wife, was living there. So I was moving for love, but I got there and there was this whole explosion of music and culture. And in the same way that bands were coming to Seattle trying to get a record deal, there were a lot of cartoonists who were coming because of Fantagraphics, the alternative comics publisher, to try to get a deal to do a comic book for them. And then there was like very little money in Seattle, but a lot of artistic talent. So there were a lot of designers. A guy who became a real mentor to me was named Art Chantry. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was the art director of a weekly music publication called The Rocket.
Okay.
And he really gave me my first chance to do illustration when I got to the city. And so I learned a ton from him. And he was a guy who he absorbed influences everywhere. And from like old pulp novel covers and old record album covers and weird ads in magazines from the 50s and 60s and things like that. And so he kind of, in a way, taught me to just broaden my sense of what influences should be and just to kind of like absorb everything I could. And so between that and then living in this town that had all these cartoonists and the Fantagraphics comic book, underground comic book, alternative comic book company, I was just getting hit with all this stuff and kind of incorporating it into my own style. I think about that time, I probably felt like, I don't know that I have a style, but the more I kept absorbing influences and building it into my own work, my style just sort of naturally developed, I guess.
And and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, but what was cartoon the medium that you were originally kind of drawn to? I mean, did you grow up reading comics?
Yeah. I collected comic books. I collected like superhero comic books when I was young. And when I got started drawing, because, I probably initially started, I would like trace the cover of a comic book.
Yeah.
And then I would try to draw it on my own, like look at a cover and try to copy, try to draw Spider-Man in a pose or something. And then eventually started making my own comic books with my own characters. And then I started branching into like editorial cartooning. When I was in middle school, my cartoons started getting published in the community newspaper. And in high school, I was the cartoonist in the newspaper there. And then in college, And I just love, my parents actually had kind of a mini library of books on cartooning. And it's only been in recent years, since my parents have passed away, that I've kind of inherited them, that I realized when I was growing up, I sort of thought everybody's family had that. Like, doesn't everybody's family have a bunch of Peanuts and
I remember my family.
New Yorker cartoonists? Yeah. I kind of took it for granted, but those definitely had a huge influence on me too.
So what was the comic book scene like in the early 90s? I mean, I feel like it seems like an art form that kind of, just like music, it goes through waves, kind of, it ebbs and flows in popular culture. Where was it when you kind of landed in Seattle? What was happening with it then?
Well, the line that was used in a lot of articles about comics were, comics, they're not just for kids anymore. And it became such a cliche. And it was also something that was so slow to catch on. So when I moved there were people very earnestly, people like Dan Klaus or the Hernandez brothers who do Love and Rockets, or Pete Bagg, who lived in Seattle, who did the comics book Hate. They're some of the biggest names, I would say, at the time. Big meaning big within an underground sense. I mean, at the time, it was still a totally fringy thing. So the fact that like movies have been made off of Dan Klaus's comics, like Ghost World, that just changed everything. And now, schools have library sections of graphic novels. I mean, back then that did not exist at all.
Yeah.
So, and you couldn't buy comics or graphic novels in a bookstore. I mean, it was very fringy. I went to the San Diego Comic Convention in 1994. I actually put together this fundraiser kind of charity comic, and I tried to market it and sell it there. I got a whole bunch of people to contribute their artwork to it. But going there was sobering, because it was like, and it's still sort of that way. I mean, superheroes dominate everything, but I think independent illustrators and cartoonists have gotten at least a little bigger in stature. People like Chris Ware and stuff. Like there's I mean, in the broader sense of the culture, they're very high in stature, but within the scene of the comics conventions, back then it was super marginalized. And I think now some of those people have risen and they can have a more prominent presence.
I mean, was the goal to be the next, like King of DC Comics? I mean, was that the goal back then? Or you said a lot of people were moving there to get their stuff made. I mean, Seattle, people were doing things there.
Yeah, I think Fantagraphics was sort of like an up and coming publisher. And so if you wanted to do something where you were the author that wrote and drew your comics, as opposed to sort of the assembly line method of the superhero comics, where you've got a writer and a penciler and an inker and a colorist, if you wanted to just be the auteur who was doing it, Fantagraphics was one of the biggest publishers there was for that, even though that said, they didn't have much money and et cetera. But I think that was a real attraction. So the same way, if you were like an indie, punk band and you wanted to be on K Records or something, you'd move to the Northwest. And so there was sort of a parallel there, I think,
Yeah. So you're in Seattle, early 90s, all that shit pops off. Not sure how involved you were with it then, but can you remember, were you getting involved with art and music at that time, or did it take a couple of years for you to kind of were you approached by some local bands? How did you get involved in that scene?
So I started by, I got involved with a startup magazine. This is before the internet. So if you were ambitious and young and you wanted to like make a statement, like you'd do a zine, and this was a little bit of a step above than that. It was an actual magazine, like an arts magazine. And then we had like a benefit. So I made a poster for the benefit that had some bands in it. And that was the first thing I did. And then I also I was really had to be scrappy to try to make a living as an artist. And so one thing I started doing was working for this publication. It was like it was a newsprint publication that would put out a compendium of of like political cartoons and comic strips. And then I worked with the guy who was selling the ads, and then he would approach bars and places like that and say, well, if you want an ad drawn in a cartoon style, here's a guy who could do that. So I would be like making an ad and getting paid in food or beer or concert tickets, you know. And then it started to kind of overlap where I was just meeting people, and there was a bar called the Rebar in Seattle, and a guy who was kind of in charge of their promotion and I met up, and I started doing some posters for them because it was a real part of the culture in Seattle in the early 90s that you know, posters would be put up on telephone poles. And all over town, right? And so there was this kind of thing where you would look and see which design. Oh, there's a Jeff Kleinsmith poster. Oh, there's an Art Chantry poster. Oh, I see that's Cyclops. You know, these different people who are Justin Hampton, you know, different artists were designing posters. And as an artist, you'd be keeping your eye out for who's doing what. Oh, they did that concert, you know. And this was all just like black and white Xeroxes that were just stapled up. So I started doing some that way. And then a really interesting thing happened. This woman ran for city council on the platform of that she was going to clean up the city from these ugly and dangerous posters that were a danger to people working on the power lines, because the posters were, I mean, it was just a ridiculous thing, but she won, sadly, and she got posters banned so that you couldn't put up posters like that anymore, which was a real blow to the culture.
Oh yeah.
But in a paradoxical way, which is interesting, because designers could no longer make posters that would just go up on telephone poles or in public places. This one club called Mo decided to put out an oversized newsprint publication once a month that had, each page would be like a poster for a concert that was coming up.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so Art Chantry, the guy I mentioned earlier, he was the art director. So he would pick and choose who got to design the posters. And
how many posters? I mean, you said it was once a month publication?
Yeah. So, and it was pretty big. It was like, probably like double the size of a newspaper. So that each page was like a poster size kind of.
Yeah.
And in some pages you'd open and there might be two posters sideways, or there might be one giant poster, you know, it varied. And it was mostly black and white. Maybe there was like one spot color here and there. And I did one poster for them, and it was just a smaller one that was black and white. And then I did a second one, and the owners of the club said, oh, that poster is so cool, that deserves to be printed in color. So they got a hold of a screen printer, and they said, you know, we want to print this in color. So this was how I did my first color silkscreen poster, was all because of this anti-postering ordinance that had been.
And you were only doing black and white up until that point?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, and it was a poster for a band called Material Issue. Okay. I don't know, do you know them from Chicago?
No, I know. Are they still playing?
Well, no. So it was, the band was Material Issue, and they're from Chicago, and they were kind of part of that kind of alternative rock wave of the early 90s. And part of what I would get for doing these designs is like a free ticket to the show.
Yeah.
And I'd get like a little bit of credit to get either food or beer or both.
Yeah.
So the day of the show, I go over there because this is my first big poster. I'm kind of excited. And, you know, I'm drinking a beer with a few friends. And then I noticed that the tour bus is outside.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, wow, that's pretty cool. And I should go say hi to them. So I go out there and I knock on the tour bus, and the manager comes and he's like, yeah, what do you want? And I said, hey, my name's Ward. I just wanted to say, like, I designed the poster for the show tonight. And then he said something like, yeah, they never cleared it with us to make posters with our name on it or something. And I was like, oh, okay. You know, I'm just trying to be a nice guy. Yeah. I said, well, I just thought I could come over and say hi to the band, you know, since I was really excited to do this poster.
Yeah.
yeah. And they're like, he's like, no, they don't want to talk to you. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
And so I went back in the club. I'm like, well, that's kind of weird, but they just sort of brushed me off. And then we were just chatting with some people, and some other guys came over, and we're like, who are you, or what are you doing? Like, oh, we're playing tonight. We're on the, yeah, we're kind of bummed though, because our name isn't on the poster. And I was like, oh, they didn't tell me, that you guys were playing. What's the name of your band? And he goes, Weezer. And they were just like a unknown band at that point, but they went on to be way bigger than Material Issue. And they're like, yeah, these guys are real jerks. They won't let us go on their bus, and they don't talk to us or socialize with us the whole time. And
that's wild. So that had to be what, 92, 93?
That was probably, that was 94, I think.
Yeah, okay, because yeah, I mean, Weezer, they have an interesting history, because they weren't really a band for that long before they kind of whatever. But I almost got an internship after high school. I immediately started working. I did audio stuff forever. And I almost got, when I first started, I almost got an internship at Electric Lady Studios.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I was in that room where they recorded the Blue album. That's where I did my interview, in the live room, which is cool, because there's some really cool footage of that band recording that album, at least photo wise.
Wow.
Interesting. Do you know, was it Rivers that talked to you?
I think so.
Okay. Yeah, right on. Cool.
It's my memory. Yeah. It's a while back now, but yeah.
Sweet. So then how do you start working with the bigger bands? I mean, how did that kind of come about with that stuff?
Well, I think I did a few more silkscreen posters in Seattle, but it was also right at the precipice that I was getting ready to move. And because my wife and I got married in 94, and about 6 months later, we sat down and talked and decided we wanted to move to New York City. I think it had always been a goal of mine. As much as I loved Seattle, I would pick up Rolling Stone magazine and say, why can't I work for them? Like, how do I get them to hire me to illustrate things for their magazine? I really wanted to do the record review page, was one of my big.
Their offices were in New York at that time?
Yeah.
Because they started in SF, right?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
But they were in New York for quite a while then. I don't know when they moved there, but at least in the 80s, I would think.
Yeah.
So when we left Seattle, we decided to make the summer kind of a road trip. And we went through San Francisco, and we're just kind of trying to figure out what to do, looking around like, well, what's there to see in the city? And I found some listing like in a weekly newspaper or something about a gallery, Art Rock Gallery, which doesn't exist anymore, I don't think. But
San Francisco.
In San Francisco.
Well, it's funny you say that, because they just opened up within the last 3 years in Lower Haight, a fantastic art studio dedicated to poster concert rock art. Yeah. Now that I want to say it's called I can look it up on my phone, like the Haight Art Center. I've been at multiple times. They have fantastic stuff. Yeah, I'm sure some of your stuff will probably end up there at some point. But all right, cool. Yeah. So all right, so you're in SF, and what was the name of the place in SF?
It was called Art Rock.
Okay.
And is the place that's there now, is it both vintage and new posters, or one of the other?
Yeah. I mean, it's always rotating. So they're every 3 months it's SF, right? So it's interesting. This is something I guess we could talk about it now, because I want to pick your brain about this. I'm an avid poster collector, big poster guy. And you don't see a lot of stuff from the 60s and from the 70s and from the 80s. And I don't know if it's just because it never survived time, or if the art form just wasn't really happening. So like, you'll go to that place and you'll see, like this fucking awesome, 1978 Rolling Stones at, whatever. And you're like, but you don't see a lot of that stuff just in general, even like, on Google Images and shit like that. I don't know why. Maybe you could answer that question, but they have all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, like the Fillmore posters from the 60s and stuff, those are pretty celebrated and
Definitely.
but yeah, to me, it seems like there's a period from the 70s through the 80s where it's a lot less prominent, and then it seems like it really got bigger in the 90s.
Exactly. Kind of
Again.
where you started doing it. Yeah, but there's that time, there's not a lot of shit going on, especially hand-drawn concert posters.
Yeah,
In the 60s, especially. Have you ever been to the Fillmore in San Francisco?
I've walked by, but I've never been in it, sadly.
As a poster artist, you must at some point. Well, I'll take you to a show there because upstairs they have all the posters, all of them from
Wow.
the original ones. Like
Wow.
Mike Bloomfield, 1966, with the Paul Butterfield Blues Band. I mean, the OG stuff. Yeah.
That sounds fantastic,
Oh
man.
yeah, oh yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah. So to get back to your story, so you want to have the goal of working in Rolling Stone, ideally. So New York City, mid 90s, that's what you want to do.
Yeah, and so we're going to head out there, but we're traveling around first. We come through San Francisco. I read about this art rock gallery. I'm like, I really want to go see this. Let's go. Can we go check this out? So we go down, and it was full of great stuff. And there was a guy named Phil Cushway who ran it. It was his business, and he both would market and sell classic like Fillmore posters and 1960s psychedelic posters, and produce and sell new posters. He was kind of he would work with artists and get them to design posters, and then was selling them out of his gallery. And he had a catalog, again, before the internet, that you could be on a mailing list, you'd get a catalog every few months or something like that. And I was like, man, this is what I want to do. And so I connected with him right then and there. It was serendipity that I just happened to be passing through San Francisco and happened to see this place.
Yeah.
And so I started doing a number of posters with them. I did quite a few. So I did one for Beck and Pavement and Sunvolt, Morphine, a number of bands in the 90s. And it was really fun. So that kind of extended my my color silkscreen poster designing career for sure. And then when I got to New York and I started getting these jobs with Art Rock, part of the deal was I would get a bunch of them. And so then I could use the posters as promotion. I'd meet an art director and I'd bring them a poster, say, here's my latest poster.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And they'd put it up on the wall, and then they were trying to assign an illustration assignment, and they'd look on their wall and go, oh, what about that guy? And then they'd call me and
Is that how it was done? I mean, is that how it's still done?
I think now there's a lot of, it's a lot about social media too, and people seeing things on Instagram. And but back then I really felt like I never hired an agent or anything. I wanted to meet the art directors in person. So I'd go to great lengths to find connections so I could like get an introduction to somebody, and then I would give them something like, here's a poster. I'm going
to ask kind of a question, correct me if I'm wrong. When you say the art director, do bands hire these art directors? I mean, how does that process work when the bigger bands get in touch with you? I mean, there's an intermediary, obviously, between the act and the artist, but
I should clarify.
Yeah.
So the art directors I'm referring to are like editorial art directors. So
okay.
Stone, for instance, or
most definitely, yeah.
Magazines. I did most of my work was with magazines back then. That was kind of my bread and butter. And the posters didn't pay a lot, but they were just fun, and I had a lot of artistic freedom.
Yeah.
And when I was doing them with Art Rock would coordinate with like the promoter of the show and the band and all that stuff. So they would just come to me with a deal already set and say, hey, we want you to do a poster for this show. And I'd be like, awesome, But then there were some other cases where Pearl Jam, for instance, I had a real direct connection with because I had met them in Seattle. I didn't meet the band per se, but I mentioned earlier that I was doing a charity comic book in 1994. So there was a kind of a right-wing attempt to pass this anti-LGBT legislation in the state of Oregon. there's a documentary about it called No on 9, I think, about how they defeated that. But that was, at the time, that was a big thing going. And this same right-wing group was planning to come to Washington State and try to pass the same legislation there. And I woke up and read about it, and I was like, I can't believe anybody would vote for this, because the newspaper, the story on the front page of the newspaper had a poll that said if this bill was presented today, it would pass. And it was like really dispiriting. So I was like, what could I do about this? And I mean, it's kind of a crazy idea, but I just pulled out a piece of paper and made a wish list of what cartoonists would I wish to have in a fundraising comic book. And so, I called them and got over 40 people to contribute to it. And I had to have benefit concerts to raise money to publish the book that was then supposed to raise money for the cause. And I made a poster for the concert and sold that, everything was going towards trying to raise money for the whole thing. And when it got down to it, I was still short of some of the money to publish the comic book. And I was brainstorming, like, what could I do? And I thought, why not ask Pearl Jam? Well, actually, one thing happened before that. I have to back up. So I think it was 93, Pearl Jam was going to have a free concert, and they told the local radio stations, you can become the sponsor, like the local radio station sponsor of the concert, if you give us a proposal for some project you will do that's anti-hate. And one of the radio stations proposed a project of doing these murals, and they won the competition, and they became the sponsor of the concert, and they asked me to do a mural. So I had done this mural that apparently was on stage with Pearl Jam. I wasn't able to go to the concert, but it was apparently on stage with them when they played, which is cool. And so I thought, well, I know that their feelings are against hate, and this comic book is all about being against hate.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd be interested. So I had to kind of work connections to figure out who to talk to, and Pearl Jam ended up paying the extra money.
Oh, wow.
To get the comic book published. They just donated it to the project, which was super cool.
Yeah.
And so then I kept in touch with them, and I did some work for Jeff Ament. He has a side project band, or he did at the time, called Three Fish.
He's the bass player, right?
Yeah. And his brother, Barry Ament, has this company called Ames Bros. And back then they would do all the graphics for—
Wait, the poster artist Ames Bros?
Yeah.
Well, that's Jeff Ament's brother?
Yes. Yeah.
I have one of my favorite posters.
Oh, nice. Yes.
That was cammed in 2010. Okay, wow, I did not know that. Very cool.
Yeah. So they're still going strong in Seattle.
Yeah.
They do a lot of Pearl Jam work still, but they do other stuff like Fish and things like that. Yeah, they're awesome, super nice guys. So I kind of kept in touch with them, and then I kept kind of hinting, I'd love to do a Pearl Jam poster someday if you ever need an artist. And so they gave me the chance, and I ended up doing a number of them over time. And so that was a case where it was really a connection directly more with the band. So these posters would come to me in all different ways. Sometimes the promoter would ask me to do it, or sometimes I would meet the band and ask them, I'd love to do a poster for you. And they'd say, okay, how about this one, or something.
And this is while you're in New York, right?
Yeah. I did the bulk of my color and silkscreen posters when I was there.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to ask the question a lot of our listeners want to know, because it's a historical piece of art now. How did you get involved with our favorite band, Fish? How did that one even come about? And Halloween too. I mean, legendary.
Yeah. I felt so lucky. I mean, I think I'll tell you, I had a crazy project in 97. I was, as I said, I got to New York and I was pounding the pavement, and I was trying to meet art directors of magazines and things like that, and try to find ways to get my foot in the door. And I had met this guy who he'd been at Esquire, And I kind of worked my way into meeting him, and then he left Esquire and he was at Money Magazine. So I called him and went over there, even though I thought, I don't know, Money Magazine doesn't seem like my style, but I'm looking for work anywhere. And if you have a connection, you might as well follow it.
It
right?
is, yeah.
So I went over there and he said, yeah, I don't know that your style is quite right for this magazine. He said, but you should meet this guy that I met on the subway. And he gave me the phone number of a guy he met on the subway. I called him. He was working at what was now the new, very hip, very new, up and coming design company for Broadway theater. And they had just done Rent, the play Rent, the musical Rent had just come out. And the way that before that, theater design had gotten really staid. You know, the posters for theater got really boring. And Rent came out and just looked totally East Village, downtown punk kind of, and it just was a shock, right? And they wanted to kind of follow up with something like that. And I showed them all my concert posters and they hired me. And so I ended up doing the poster for John Leguizamo's Broadway show Freak, which
was that a movie?
Well, Spike Lee ended up filming it for HBO later. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So it started out as a play.
Yep. It was a one-man show.
Okay.
And great show. And my artwork was similar to my concert posters. It was like bright, bold, day glow illustrated poster that just jumped out at you, and it was all over the city. And it was on the marquee, and it was in the subway, and it was full page ads and newspapers, and it was a huge break for me. I was so lucky that this worked out. But after that, I just started to get kind of an avalanche of work, like, because I could meet people and just say I did the Freak poster, and they knew what I was talking about. So all this kept coming to me, and it was around that time then, because it was '98 that I did the Fish poster, that they contacted me out of the blue. And I'm not even exactly sure how they found me, frankly. But they came to me and said, you know, would you be up for doing this poster? And I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. It was a little bit different the way they worked, because with other places, it was a real low budget thing. And a big part of it was, as the poster designer, you would have total creative freedom for the most part. I mean, Pearl Jam sort of had, like, they would maybe kind of veto things if it didn't seem quite right, or there's a little bit of art direction going on. But the art rock posters I just sort of did whatever I wanted and sent it, and they printed it, you know, so that was kind of nice. Fish was much more hands-on, and they kind of had lots of ideas about what they did and didn't want. So there was like a big contract, you know, none of the other stuff I did had contracts or anything like that. And you know, I gave them a certain number of sketches, I think maybe like 5 or 6 sketches. And then they chose one, and they chose, you know, I had fun making them, because Halloween concert, there's a lot of fun imagery you can play with that. And
in Vegas
too. Yeah. So, yeah. And then it went quite smoothly.
Did you have any idea who they even were?
I was not somebody who was like listening to them a lot at the time, but but you know, I was aware that they had a cult following, and and that they were, you know, kind of a jam band and everything. So it was fun. I mean, it's too bad in retrospect I didn't try to go out and see the show.
That was my next question. Did you go to the show?
I didn't. No, they sent me some cool things about the band, like from previous shows and things.
Sure, of course,
kind of fun to have. And
but
and I've always wanted to do another one. I approached them at the 20th anniversary a few years ago and said, hey, it's been 20 years. Might you be interested in having me do another poster? You know, and they've continued to kind of put me off. And
okay.
I mean, not, I don't necessarily mean in a bad way. They just, say, well, we'll keep you in mind, that kind of thing. But I
Yeah.
haven't gotten another chance.
Yeah, well, I'm going to rein in the fish nerdiness, but there's a couple of quick little questions because that's a print that's kind of, throughout time now has become a, pretty sought after print. Didn't you just you had two of them, right? You were holding on to and you let go one of them recently, right?
Yeah. So I just have one left now.
Yeah, no, it's just wild how some of these prints kind of live on throughout time. And that's, and all these I'm geeking out at all the Facebook groups and stuff like that. But whenever that print pops up, people get fucking stoked about it.
Oh, well, that's
Yeah, no, they love it. They love it. So that was a positive experience. Then kind of going forward, you started your own thing, right? That's where your website and your kind of comic series begins.
Yeah. In terms of like fish artwork, you mean, or just in general, anything?
And it was your website, Sudden Impact, right? Or the comic. It started out as a comic book originally.
So I started, around this time after I got that Freak poster job, and I started getting so much work.
Yeah.
And I realized I needed a website, and then my wife decided to come work with me because I was getting so much work. It was hard to stay on top of the business side of things and everything. So we became business partners, and I was trying to think of what's a good name for the business. And a friend of mine who's actually a concert promoter, who I met through designing a poster for one of his shows. He suggested, well, what about Sutton Impact? How about that for a name for your company? And I was like, that's pretty cool. I like that. Like a play on Sudden Impact. Okay. So I made that the name and my website, and I had a logo and everything. And then I was, in addition to doing concert posters, editorial illustration, I also, all throughout this time, have been a cartoonist where I'm writing and illustrating my own cartoons, a lot of political cartoons, things like that. And I had a cartoon in the Village Voice at the time, and it was originally called Schlock and Roll because I started it for the Rocket in Seattle, and it was a cartoon that was really making fun of music for the most part. And then that was when it was only like once a month or twice a month. But then the Village Voice wanted me to do it every week. And so then I started to feel like I need to broaden the scope because I don't know that I can find something to comment on in the music world every single week.
Yeah.
And then the art director suggested, why don't you change the name instead of Schlock and Roll, since this isn't just about music anymore? Why don't you change it to Sutton Impact? So I changed the name of the strip to that. And then I came out with a book of my comics in 2005. And that was the name of the book too. So that's where that name comes from. And then more recently, I've been, selling prints and things. I've been hired around 2000 to do some illustrations, one for Rolling Stone of the band Fish, that I illustrated them like in a fishbowl, kind of like the band.
Yeah.
And that was on the contents page of Rolling Stone, which was like a huge project I was super psyched about. And then Entertainment Weekly did a special issue about Fish.
Yeah.
And I did some illustrations in that, including the band members riding a giant hot dog like they'd done in concert. And the Fish fans kept coming to me like, can we buy prints of this? So at some point I was like, there's a lot of people who want a print of this. So we made a limited edition run of those two, the fishbowl and the hot dog, and we sold them. And that was a learning experience. In
what way? What do you mean?
Well, it was kind of crazy that, the way, we would ship them through FedEx because we really wanted to make sure they would get there safely. And we paid for insurance, but then they would get damaged and FedEx wouldn't cover us because they said the packaging wasn't their exact packaging, and so we had to bite the bullet and remake the prints and send them to the people who got them damaged. And
so there are OG damaged prints of those out there somewhere.
Potentially, yeah. I mean, we basically told the people who had the damaged ones, we'll replace it if you agree, to destroy the damaged one, because there should only be one with this number on it, because they were all limited edition. And now in recent years, it was funny because just a few years ago, the same type of thing started happening, that some fish fans were coming to me like, do you have any more prints? Like, do you have any more artwork that and there was like a drawing that I had done for Entertainment Weekly that was never published, and people liked it. So I made a print of that, of Mike Gordon with a vacuum cleaner.
Well, there's also the one with Trey bowing down to a thing. But you had already mentioned the band earlier. Why Pavement? What's the connection there?
Well, that one was published in Entertainment Weekly, and it was illustrating, the article was telling all these fun facts about fish. And one of them was that Trey reportedly loves Slanted and Enchanted.
Okay.
So that was an illustration to accompany that item. And people seem to want it. So we made a limited edition print of that one too. So I may do some more things like that. I've been thinking about it a lot. I've got a bunch of ideas, and I've connected with a silk screen printer in town. And I've got this great digital printer I've already been working with too. So I'm trying to kind of shift the way my business works, because I'm lucky that I can do something I love and eke out a living at it. But it's the landscape of media and things like that is constantly shifting. So I have to kind of figure out how it works. Like a lot of the magazines I used to work for, I used to do a ton of work for Mad Magazine, and it essentially doesn't really exist anymore like it used to anyway.
You were writing, what years were you writing for that magazine?
Let's see. I started doing stuff for them probably like the mid 2000s. So like around 2005, 2006.
So that's after the television show? Wasn't there a TV show? Am I making that up?
Strangers with Candy?
Oh, no. Yeah. I'm sorry. I was thinking of something else. Yes. So that's when you were doing
I did work for Strangers. You mean the Mad TV show?
Yeah. Okay.
The Mad TV show. The Mad TV show, it was disconnected from the magazine. It was like
Okay. Yeah. I remember that TV show.
Yeah. I think they bought the rights to the name for television, but there really was no connection between the people on the magazine and the people who did the TV show.
Oh, definitely not. I mean, that was a wild. I mean, they had Artie Lang on that show. That was a wild cast of people. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Cast.
But anyway, I'm kind of rambling here. Where was I going with that?
Well, you mentioned Strangers with Candy. Tell people how you worked with them, because they're people obviously.
Yeah. So that, for people who might not know, that was a TV show that Stephen Colbert and Amy Sedaris and another guy, Paul Dinello, created. It was sort of their passion project, and it was sort of a satirical takeoff on the old cheesy after-school specials. It was like this sitcom in high school, but there's a kind of a former drug user, ex-con woman who decides to clean up her act and go back to high school as a middle-aged woman. And it's absurdist and hilarious. It's
almost cringy to a degree,
Yeah, definitely. And it's sort of gained kind of a cult following, it was kind of an underground hit. That was another thing. I just got so lucky that I was hired to design the animated opening to that show and work with J.J. Settlemeyer, who's kind of a legendary animator who had done all the Saturday Night Live animation and those.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And he did Beavis and Butthead, the Beavis and Butthead show. And
when you say did that, what do you mean? What does that mean?
His studio produced it, did all the animation. Yeah. And so it was just, that was fantastic. I got to meet Stephen and Amy and Paul, and I'm still, I lived in the same neighborhood that Amy Sedaris lived in, and I'd run into her on the street a lot. And I've seen Stephen Colbert. I've been to his show. And he's just such a nice guy. It's great when there are people who you respect so much artistically, and that they're still really good people at the same time. it's really demoralizing if you meet one of your heroes and then they're a jerk, which happens. But
They say you're never supposed to meet your heroes. I don't. And the last person I want to meet is Paul Simon. You know,
yeah,
so like it would ruin a lot.
you're just afraid. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you navigate? I mean, how are you seeing the landscape now? I mean, how has art changed? I mean, technology has changed so much stuff. You know, has technology even changed the way you do your art? I mean, you know, so much has changed in the last just 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, I really the social media. I just was talking the other night how I feel kind of trapped by it. Like I can't imagine doing what I'm doing without using social media, and I'm not even necessarily somebody who uses it the best. You know,
Yeah.
I can only do so much of it, but because I basically do it all myself. But I feel like when I do a cartoon or when I create anything, I put it out there. Like that's the way to get the artwork seen, is to put it on social media. But it ends up taking a certain amount of time, you know, as everybody knows, and that gets to be kind of wearing. You know, there's moments where I think, what if I just didn't do any of this? But then I don't know. I feel like I'd be sitting in a bubble and nobody would see my work. So, but at the same time, it's also great because it allows interaction with people who like my work.
I was going to ask that. Yeah. Are you interactive with the people, your fans, and the people who kind of comment and stuff?
Yeah, I do. I try to,
It can be
you know,
brutal.
maybe I do it too much, but I try to respond to people quite a bit, and engage. And because if people like my work and they reach out to tell me, I feel really flattered. You know, I'm honored. Um, and yeah, I just kind of feel, but I'm thinking about all sorts of things now, like Substack. Are you familiar with that?
Well, for writers, right? Yeah, but they
But
do it for artists.
I think Substack has been trying to branch out to cartoonists and bring them
Oh
into
wow.
it. So I've just been learning about that, and I've been kind of considering maybe doing that. But
I mean, you know, people argue that Substack is saving the art form of journalism.
mhm.
You know, but I mean, especially, you know, you're as a political cartoonist, I think you'd be a hit in Substack probably.
It would be, yeah, it would be fun. I'm just, it's one of those things. It's like, I don't know.
So
I'll probably
new.
just jump in and try it and say, I'm
Yeah.
going to give myself 6 months and see if it works. And but it's kind of unknown. You know, the way the internet and online culture goes, you never know. Like it could be the next Instagram or it could be the next MySpace. You know what
I
I
know.
mean?
What was the one recently? Clubhouse that lasted for I think 3 weeks.
Ooh, ouch.
Do you remember that one? That was about a year ago. That was like where people, it was an audio only. And you would join these rooms and people would talk and have these, you know, but I don't even know if they do it anymore.
Wow.
No, I don't know. Yeah, all right. Well, Ward, I mean, this has been an absolute blast, man. I mean, we're mentioning it now. You said social media. Where can people get in touch with you? Do you do Twitter, Instagram? What's your handle?
Yeah, basically just Ward Sutton on Instagram and on Twitter. And I think that's how you'd find me on Facebook. Yeah, I'm just on all those.
And can people reach out to you? Do you do any kind of custom work? Do you do any commissions or anything like that?
I haven't done a lot of commissions. Uh, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. It's just not something I've gotten into much, but I'm always interested to talk to people. I'm working on a piece that a group of like poster collectors contacted me and said, "Hey, would you want to design a poster? And you know, we just want something you've done, and it would be kind of for our group." So I've been kind of working on something in that realm. So I'm open to lots of possibilities.
You want to design a new logo for this podcast?
Could be, yeah, sure.
Well, let's make it happen. We would love that, Ward.
Okay, cool. All
Thanks so
right.
much, man. Yeah, so that's it. Instagram, Twitter, and people, if you don't know, please check out his stuff. You know, it's been great talking to you, and all the best, man.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thanks for having me on. It's great to talk to you.
Most definitely. Enjoy the rest of the day.
All right, you too.
All right,
Take
bye-bye.
care.